What if I told you that death isn't actually the end of choice? That even in our final moments, we still have the power to say no to what comes next. I've been studying cases of past life regression for years, diving deep into the research of hypnotherapists who document these extraordinary experiences. And recently, I came across a case that completely shattered everything I thought I knew about what happens when we die. This isn't just another story about the afterlife. This is about a woman who made a decision that trapped her between worlds, and what that taught me about the true nature of letting go. If you've ever wondered what really happens when we die, or if you've ever felt like you had unfinished business that you just couldn't let go of, then this story is going to resonate with you in ways you never expected. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to hear challenges everything we think we know about death, choice, and the power of acceptance. Let me take you into a documented case where a woman chose to become a ghost and discovered that some prisons are of our own making. You know, there's an old saying that when you're dying, your life flashes before your eyes. But what I discovered through studying hypnotic regression cases is that this experience is far more complex and far more controllable than we ever imagined. I came across this particular case in the research of a hypnotherapist who had been conducting past life regression sessions for decades. She had documented hundreds of cases where people, under deep hypnosis, would relive their past lives from birth to death. Most of the time, her subjects experienced death as a peaceful transition. They simply moved from one state of being to another, often guided by loving presences or drawn toward what many describe as the light. The hypnotherapist noted that there seemed to be a natural flow to the death experience. People would describe feeling their consciousness separate from their physical body, often floating above and observing their own death. Then, typically, they would be met by deceased loved ones, spiritual guides, or simply feel drawn toward a warm, loving light that represented the next phase of their existence. But this case was completely different, completely unprecedented in her decades of research. The woman under hypnosis had just relived an entire lifetime through regression. She had experienced being an elderly woman who had lived a full, rich life. She had a loving husband, a comfortable home, and when her time came, she died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the familiar comforts of her bedroom. The hypnotherapist expected to witness the typical post-death experience that she documented countless times before, the soul moving toward light, meeting spiritual guides, transitioning to whatever comes next. But then something unprecedented happened. Instead of describing the usual journey toward light or the presence of spiritual guides, the woman began describing something that made my blood run cold when I read it. She was watching her own funeral, not from some ethereal plane of existence, not as a soul moving toward the afterlife, but as a conscious observer standing right there in the physical world, watching as her body was carried to a hilltop cemetery near her home. Have you ever had that feeling of being stuck between two choices, unable to move forward because you felt like you had something important left undone? That's exactly what happened to her in that moment between life and death. The hypnotherapist noted that the woman's voice during the session became increasingly agitated as she described this scene. There was something she felt she needed to do, something she couldn't leave unfinished. And in that crucial moment when most souls naturally transition to the next realm, she made a choice that would change everything. If this is resonating with you so far, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever felt trapped by unfinished business? What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about death and the afterlife. Instead of moving on to whatever comes after death, this woman made a choice that would trap her in a nightmare of her own creation. She decided to go back home. Now you might think, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Maybe she just wanted to say goodbye to her house, to have one last look around. But what she discovered when she returned home was beyond anything she could have imagined. As she approached her front door, she expected to walk up to it, maybe peer through the windows one last time. Instead, she found herself walking straight through the door, not opening it, not even touching it, walking through it like it wasn't even there. And that's when the horrifying reality of her situation began to dawn on her. She looked down at herself and realized she was no longer solid. She described herself as appearing like a fog or mist in the shape of a person. When she moved near furniture, she could see right through herself, the familiar objects of her home, the chairs she had sat in, the tables she had eaten at, the walls that had sheltered her for decades. They were all still there, but she could no longer interact with them in any meaningful way. She had become exactly what she never believed in during her lifetime. She had become a ghost. But here's what struck me most about her experience when I read this case. It wasn't the supernatural abilities that disturbed her. It was the isolation, the complete and utter isolation. She wandered through her house, the house she had lived in for decades, and it felt foreign to her. Every room held memories, every corner had stories, but she could no longer participate in the life of the house. She was like a visitor in her own home, able to observe but unable to engage. She could hear the chambermaids working in the rooms below, going about their daily tasks of cleaning and maintaining the house. Their voices drifted up to her, familiar and comforting, yet impossibly distant, and at one point she overheard them whispering to each other about how they could hear the old woman walking around, how they believed she was haunting the house. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine being able to hear people talking about you, knowing they can sense your presence, but being completely unable to communicate with them, unable to tell them you're okay, unable to say goodbye, unable to complete whatever it was that brought you back in the first place. She tried everything she could think of to make contact. She attempted to move objects, to create some kind of sign that would let them know she was there and trying to communicate. But her ghostly hands passed right through everything. She tried to speak, but no sound came out that they could hear. She was trapped in a state of perpetual observation, unable to participate in the world she was so desperately trying to remain connected to. But the worst part wasn't the isolation. The worst part was the growing realization that she had made a terrible mistake. Have you ever made a decision that seemed right in the moment, only to realize later that you had trapped yourself in a situation you couldn't escape from? That's exactly what happened to her. She had returned home with some kind of unfinished business, something she felt she needed to complete or resolve. Maybe it was a conversation she never had. Maybe it was something she wanted to tell her family. Maybe it was simply the feeling that she wasn't ready to let go of the life she had known. But in her ghostly state, she was completely powerless to do anything about it. She spent what felt like days wandering through her house, growing more and more frustrated, more and more desperate. She tried to move objects, tried to write messages, tried everything she could think of to communicate with the living world. Nothing worked. The hypnotherapist noted that during this part of the session, the woman's breathing became rapid and her body showed signs of distress. She was reliving not just the experience of being a ghost, but the emotional torment of being trapped in that state. And slowly, a terrible truth began to sink in. Being a ghost wasn't some romantic, mysterious existence, like the stories she might have heard during her lifetime. It wasn't about having special powers or being able to watch over loved ones. It was a prison of her own making. What I realized reading this case is that her attachment to the physical world, her refusal to let go, hadn't given her power over that world. It had actually cut her off from any real ability to influence it at all. She had chosen to remain connected to the physical realm, but in doing so, she had lost her ability to truly connect with anything or anyone in it. What happened next taught me one of the most profound lessons about the nature of letting go that I've ever encountered. So after spending what felt like an eternity trapped in her ghostly state, growing more frustrated and more isolated with each passing moment, she finally came to a realization that would change everything. The hypnotherapist described how the woman's voice during the session suddenly became calm, almost resigned. The agitation and frustration that had characterized her description of the ghostly experience began to fade, replaced by a kind of quiet understanding. She understood that she would never be able to accomplish whatever she had come back to do, not because she lacked the will or the desire, but because her attachment to the physical world had actually cut her off from any real power to influence it. The instant, and I mean the very instant, she came to this realization and accepted it, everything changed. One moment she was standing in her house, frustrated and alone, trying desperately to move a piece of paper or make some kind of contact with the living world. The next moment, she was standing on a hill overlooking a vast valley, and she was no longer alone. Her deceased husband was standing right next to her. But here's the part that gave me chills when I read this. They weren't old anymore. They appeared exactly as they had on their wedding day, young, vibrant, full of life and love. In that dimension, in that state of acceptance, they had been restored to their most perfect selves. The hypnotherapist noted that the woman's entire demeanor changed during this part of the session. Her voice became warm and peaceful, filled with wonder and joy. The contrast with her previous distress was remarkable. As they stood there arm in arm looking out over this valley, she began to describe something that completely transformed my understanding of how we review and process our lives after death. The valley below them wasn't just a landscape. It was what she called a valley of lives. She described it as if someone had taken a brightly colored quilt or patchwork and thrown it over the entire valley, creating a living collage of every scene, every place, every moment from the life she had just completed. Think about this for a moment. Instead of her life flashing before her eyes in a linear fashion, childhood, then adolescence, then adulthood, then old age, her entire existence was laid out before them simultaneously. She could see everything at once. She said, "We can see the cemetery, we can see the city, we can see the house, we can see the mountains. It's like we can see everything we've ever known all combined together. It's as if this was our life, and this is what we had together." What struck me most about this description was the sense of completion and peace that came with it. She said, "We were glad we came through that life like we did. We had something intact when it was over with. It's peaceful. It's sort of like you stand there and survey." But then she gave an analogy that completely changed how I think about life and death. She compared it to standing in a garden that you had spent years cultivating. You remember what you did to get the garden ready. You remember planting the seeds, you remember watering and weeding and caring for each plant. You remember the seasons of growth and dormancy, the times of abundance and the times of scarcity. And now you can see the final results spread out before you. You look out over this valley of life, point to certain areas, and you say, "Well, we really did have a good time here, and this was the great thing that we did together here." You're admiring all the different parts of the garden, and you can see it all at once. All the different scenes of your life are laid out, and you can touch them. What I understood from this is that the review of our lives after death isn't a judgment. It's not about being graded or evaluated by some external force. It's not about having our mistakes pointed out or being made to feel guilty about our failures. It's about seeing the complete picture, understanding how all the pieces fit together, and appreciating the beauty of the whole journey. She described it as literally going through a scrapbook of their lives, but instead of turning pages one by one, they could see and touch every memory simultaneously. The joy of their wedding day was right there next to the sorrow of losing a child. The excitement of building their home was adjacent to the quiet contentment of growing old together. Every emotion, every experience, every lesson learned was part of the beautiful tapestry of their shared existence. The woman who had been trapped as a ghost, frustrated and isolated, was now experiencing the most profound sense of peace and completion imaginable. And that's when I realized the crucial difference between her two experiences. When she refused to cross over, when she clung to her unfinished business, she became trapped in a state of perpetual incompletion. She was focused on the one thing she thought she needed to fix, the one conversation she thought she needed to have, the one task she thought she needed to complete. And that focus on incompletion made it impossible for her to see or experience anything else. But when she accepted that she couldn't control or complete everything, she was immediately transported to a state where she could see that everything was already complete, already perfect in its own way. The hypnotherapist noted that this transition happened instantaneously. There was no gradual movement from one state to the other, no process of earning her way to this peaceful perspective. The moment she let go of her need to control the outcome, she found herself in a place of perfect understanding and love. This case completely revolutionized how I think about death, but more importantly, it transformed how I think about life. You see, what this woman experienced as a ghost is something many of us experience while we're still alive. We become so attached to our unfinished business, so focused on what we haven't completed or resolved, that we trap ourselves in a kind of living prison. Think about it. How many times have you been unable to enjoy a present moment because you were worried about something you hadn't finished? How many times have you felt like you couldn't move forward in life because there was something from your past that you hadn't resolved? I started thinking about my own life after reading this case, and I realized how often I've lived like that ghost, wandering through my days, unable to fully connect with the people and experiences around me because I was so focused on what I thought I needed to complete or fix. The woman in this case discovered that her attachment to unfinished business didn't give her power to complete it. Instead, it cut her off from the very peace and perspective that would have allowed her to see that completion comes not from controlling every outcome, but from accepting the bigger picture. When she was a ghost, she was focused on the details, on the specific things she thought she needed to fix or complete. But when she let go and accepted her limitations, she was able to see her entire life as a beautiful, complete work of art. I think this has profound implications for how we live our daily lives. How often do we postpone happiness, postpone peace, postpone contentment, because we're waiting to finish something, to resolve something, to complete something? How often do we tell ourselves, "I'll be happy when I finish this project," or "I'll feel peaceful when I resolve this relationship issue," or "I'll feel complete when I achieve this goal"? What if the secret to feeling complete isn't finishing everything on our list, but rather gaining the perspective to see that our lives are already whole, already meaningful, already complete in ways we can't see when we're focused on the details? The woman's experience suggests that there are two ways to live. We can live like ghosts, trapped by our attachments and unable to truly connect with the world around us. Or we can live with the perspective of the valley, seeing the beauty and completeness of our journey even while we're still in the middle of it. But here's what really struck me about this case. The transition from ghost to the valley didn't happen because she solved her problems or completed her unfinished business. It happened the moment she accepted that she couldn't complete them. That acceptance didn't make her weak or passive. It actually liberated her into a state of profound peace and understanding. I've started applying this insight to my own life, and the results have been remarkable. When I find myself getting trapped in worry about unfinished projects or unresolved relationships, I ask myself, what if this situation is already complete in ways I can't see? What if my need to control the outcome is actually preventing me from experiencing the peace that's available right now? This doesn't mean we become passive or stop working toward our goals. It means we hold our goals lightly, understanding that our peace and completion don't depend on achieving every single thing we think we need to achieve. The woman in this case learned that love transcends death, that relationships continue beyond the physical world, and that our lives have meaning and beauty that can only be fully appreciated when we step back and see the whole picture. But perhaps most importantly, she learned that the very thing she thought she needed to complete in order to find peace was actually preventing her from experiencing the peace that was already available to her. This makes me think about all the times in my life when I've been so focused on fixing something or completing something that I've missed the beauty and completeness that was already present. How many moments of joy have I missed because I was worried about unfinished business? How many opportunities for connection have I passed by because I was trapped in my own version of being a ghost? The hypnotherapist who documented this case noted that it changed her entire approach to working with clients. She began to see that many of the people who came to her for regression therapy were in a sense living like ghosts, trapped by their attachments to past experiences, unable to fully engage with their present lives because they were so focused on what they thought they needed to resolve or complete. And she found that the most profound healing often came not from helping people resolve every issue from their past, but from helping them gain the perspective to see that their lives were already complete and meaningful, even with unresolved issues. As I finished reading this extraordinary case, I realized that the hypnotherapist had documented something far more significant than just an unusual near-death experience. She had captured a profound truth about the nature of human attachment and the path to genuine peace. The woman's journey from ghost to the Valley of Lives is really our journey from attachment to acceptance, from the illusion of control to the reality of trust. Every day we have the choice between living like ghosts, trapped by our attachments, isolated by our need to control outcomes, frustrated by our inability to complete everything we think we need to complete, or living with the perspective of the valley, seeing the beauty and wholeness that already exists in our lives. The most beautiful part of this story to me is that the woman didn't have to earn her way to the valley. She didn't have to solve all her problems or complete all her unfinished business. She simply had to let go of the belief that she could control everything, and in that moment of surrender, she found herself in a place of perfect love and understanding. This gives me tremendous hope for all of us who struggle with the feeling that we're not doing enough, not completing enough, not resolving enough. Maybe the peace we're seeking isn't on the other side of finishing everything. Maybe it's on the other side of accepting that we don't have to finish everything to be whole. When I think about this woman's experience, I'm reminded that death isn't really an ending. It's a change in perspective. And maybe we don't have to wait until death to experience that shift. Maybe we can choose right now to see our lives from the perspective of the valley, appreciating the beauty of the whole journey even while we're still in the middle of it. The hypnotherapist concluded her documentation of this case by noting that it had taught her something crucial about the nature of healing and transformation. Real peace doesn't come from resolving every issue or completing every task. It comes from gaining the perspective to see that our lives, exactly as they are, already have meaning and beauty and completeness that we might not be able to see from our current vantage point. If you're carrying unfinished business that's weighing on your heart, if you're feeling trapped by things you think you need to complete or resolve, I want you to consider the possibility that your completion doesn't depend on controlling every outcome. It depends on trusting that your life, exactly as it is, already has meaning and beauty that you might not be able to see from your current perspective. The woman in this case discovered that death isn't an ending. It's a change in perspective. And maybe we don't have to wait until death to experience that shift. Maybe we can choose right now to see our lives from the perspective of the valley, appreciating the beauty of the whole journey even while we're still in the middle of it. What unfinished business are you ready to release? What would change in your life if you trusted that you're already complete, already whole, already exactly where you need to be? Let me know in the comments below, and if this story touched you the way it touched me, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the only way to complete something is to let it go. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.